Well, who says that you can't mix politics and Pilsners? So does it show that you were recording on your end?
I am, yep.
Is this thing on?
We're live, baby.
Democrats destroy everything they touch.
We need to defend the police, not defund them.
MAGA, it's more than a man, it's a movement. In the 2020 election, free and fair, yes or no?
Absolutely not.
COVID has created a tyrannical government.
This is the only country in the world where those who hate it never leave.
Whether you like Pilsners, bourbons, or anything in between,
grab your favorite beverage and come have a drink with us.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Pilsners and Politics. Today we have two very special guests with us, Cathy and Stu Sr. Scheller. You guys might know these two, or at least the last name, from Lieutenant Colonel in the Marine Corps who spoke out against his incompetent leadership. Cathy, Stu Sr., it is so nice to have you on the show finally. I know we've been trying to book this for weeks now.
Thank you for having us.
We're honored to be here and to be able to talk to you and your audience.
So on the show, we quite frequently talk about how America is facing a courage crisis. And, before we get into the meat and potatoes of this conversation, I just kind of want to explain to you why I started this podcast. Early this year, late last year, I started to get the feeling that America was experiencing a courage crisis, and people just weren't speaking up, especially with the gross overreach of government. I am a small government kind of guy. I'm a conservative, as I imagine you guys are, and without strong men and women speaking up against tyranny, it just kind of perpetuates the never-ending overreach. So I want to say thank you so much for raising a man who was willing to speak out against the Goliath, if you will.
Well, thank you very much. If you would have asked me 3 months ago whether I would have thought that Cathy and I would be doing what we're doing for the last 2 months, I would have probably laughed at you. But, when we're called as humans for the right cause, we all find our courage to speak up.
Especially if it's your child.
Especially if it's your child.
Right.
But I will say I'm encouraged. Like most Americans, we're finding most people aren't dialed into the news. The news is negative often and hateful. And most Americans are finding their information on social media or podcasts like this. But I am encouraged that I'm seeing more and more Americans stand up and find their voice at school board meetings. We see courage. We see people standing up all over. So I think that's a positive sign.
We're finding that his support group, since he cannot speak out, he's gagged. They don't want to hear his voice, apparently. He's gagged, and so we had to take over as his parents speaking up. Of course, we couldn't take our turn to speak up until they did put him in prison, in solitary confinement, and that pretty much angered us. But the support that we have gotten from Americans speaking up, finding their voice, they are starting to find their voice. The rallying call has been amazing, and they have buoyed us up during our really low periods.
I'm going to tell you, I think the history that has been made in the last 2 months is going to carry this nation, and it's going to change history. It's going to change elections. I see people, we've asked people to contact their congresspeople, their representatives and senators, and I don't think Americans have ever done that much before. And we've had millions do it. And we've had we had a Congresswoman, Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia, attend Stewart's court-martial trial 10 days ago. She said, we had millions of people contact my office. Right. We've never had that before, ever, for any subject. It's just, so I believe it's going to impact elections, 2022, 2024. Americans are finding their voice.
And we're telling people, contact your congressperson. They work for you. And remind them there's an election coming up. And this is no time for fence sitting. Either you are making a call for the military to sign his resignation, as they are legally required to do per the plea deal, and they are not doing it. And we are saying, contact your congressperson, find out where they sit, remind them they work for you, and remind them that you vote.
Stu Sr., you brought up a good point a few moments earlier where you said that people just aren't tuned into the news. And a lot of the reason for that is because it's negative and it's fear-based. And I think it's quite clear after the last 18 months, almost 2 years now, that the media does nothing but sell fear. I want to back it up a little bit for our listeners and our followers who might not quite know the story. Can you just explain to the listeners what exactly happened to your son?
Well, on August 26th, just like you and me, my son, by the way, our son's a 17-year grade 5 lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps.
Field officer.
Served in the sand, 5 deployments, highly decorated. On August 26th, just like you and I, he saw 13 of his service members die with a suicide bomber.
Because of poor planning.
Right.
And,
needlessly.
Something in him snapped that night. It's you're too young to remember the movie Network. But they had a famous line in that movie, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. At that night, he posted his first video demanding accountability from the general officers, or at least admitting that they made mistakes.
Which is something you're supposed to do in the Marine Corps. Something
Right.
You've always done before. You are held accountable for your actions. Now, there is a chain of command that you're supposed to go through. And with social media, he did not follow that chain of command.
So he ended up posting 4 videos over the course of 2-3 weeks, 5 or 6 or 7 postings on social media. They were asking him to stop, demanding that he stop. He didn't. They then put him in jail.
Well, there were a lot of things that went on behind the scenes, and we can get into that in a moment.
Yeah, but they put him in jail, claiming he was a flight risk, which was bogus.
Right.
But he spent 9 days in solitary confinement, strip searched, not allowed to talk to anyone.
No phone calls.
And then, after he got out of jail, they took him to a court-martial. But before they took him to a court-martial, because the Marine Corps, they play dirty. They only know how to seek and destroy. Mm-hmm. That's how that's their mentality.
Right.
And when one of theirs goes against them, I don't care how proud they were of him or how decorated he was, they went about seeking and destroying. And so they decided, pre-court-martial trial, it would be a good idea to release the investigative report, his medical and mental health records to the media to smear him.
And they had been the whole time suggesting that he was suffering PTSD. He must be crazy to do something like this. They were suggesting to him that perhaps maybe he was suicidal, as if they wanted him to commit suicide. They did a lot of pressure points behind the scenes. And if you go to istandwithstu, stu.com, on there is his official legal court statement, and you can find out all of the things that happened from his first posting until you get to the court-martial. Also on there are his charges and his response to the charges, and a very interesting legal document, his attorney's statement. And it's all gives you a very compelling story of what goes on in the background of the military.
And so, so the first story is the call for accountability by our son. The second part of the story is how they tried to destroy him from August 26th until now. And that's what I'm calling the toxic culture of the Marine Corps. It's horrible. And we're getting hundreds of letters, emails from veterans saying, thank you for bringing light to this, Mr. and Mrs. Scheller. This is standard operating procedure. You just happen to be in the media right now and people are listening to you, and we appreciate that. But this happens to thousands of Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines. If they speak up or go against the grain, they're crushed.
Right. So you bring up a few really good points. And the first one I want to mention is that they attacked his credibility.
Yes.
And they had to do that because I think that moving forward, they would try to win it in the court of public opinion, right? Oh, wow, this guy's crazy. That's why he called out the senior leadership.
They were hoping he committed suicide.
Right.
We went to retired generals in the early weeks, and they said, you should be concerned.
Yeah.
That's part of their game plan.
Right.
So you have to understand that a minimum of 22 service people take their past and present, take their lives per day. That is on the low end. It's probably more like 35 per day. And we always wondered about that, and there could be many different conflicting reasons why that would happen. Our son was doing a lot of work with suicide prevention. He did care, and that was part of his call for accountability. People needed to know that what they did was important, that the person next to them who died or lost a limb or somebody who committed suicide, or for our Gold Star families, they needed to know that this failed exit wasn't, they needed accountability for what happened. And for that reason, and we know this because we've had hundreds of people write us and say, I was going to kill myself that night. And then I heard your son's post and it saved my life. So we're getting these and we're quite in shock.
That's quite powerful. And we had the pleasure of having two retired colonels on the show, and we discussed the Afghanistan withdrawal. A message that I want to get out to prior service members, and I happen to be one of them, is that what we did in Afghanistan wasn't a failure. We gave the Afghanis time and space to try to figure out how to run their country themselves. So even though this administration has failed us and has failed our veterans, what you guys did overseas was noble, and we're very proud of you.
Yes.
Absolutely. That's a great message, and it's the truth.
And there is another thing that his lawyer brought up that we were not aware of, and most people are not. The generals that are top brass generals that are in charge right now, through no reason of their own, it's just simply timing. They never served in the field. And unless you have smelt it, felt it, stood next to it, it's different than a textbook. And so for those officers who have served in the field for 20 years or 17 years, like our son, you maybe take that into account a little bit more personally. You understand the cost of a life.
Right.
And I'm not saying that they don't, but you just know it a little more personally.
Yeah, in the videos that he posted, I think he was speaking directly to those men and women who served overseas, and again, it took an incredible amount of courage to do it, and it's when I watched the video, it gave me chills. They've
done everything they can to destroy his life. So he's lost his pension. They tried to destroy his name. His family, his wife has decided to separate from him. He has lost his command, and most people don't understand that they have not signed his resignation letter, so he's still in the Marines. He still has to show up and be humiliated on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And they're just trying to wear him down and get him to speak again so they can throw him back in the brig.
So do you guys think that there's an expected timeline for the Marine Corps to accept his resignation?
There is no timeline. And he is 17 years in, and they could take it up to 3 years. So we, as his parents and as Americans, are going to make as much noise as we can for as long as it takes until they sign, because legally they have a commitment to sign that paper. So they agreed to that plea deal. Where is the honor in our Marine Corps today?
So it took them less than a day to relieve him of his command. It took them only days to put him in jail. So I don't understand why it wouldn't be days to accept a resignation that they've already agreed to in writing in the plea deal.
Right. Does his attorney have any recourse? Is he advocating for Stu Jr.?
The attorney said, hey, it's the government. We feel like we got a win at the court-martial. The judge was incredibly fair. Parents be happy, smile, and thank Americans for everything they did to get him out of prison.
And we are grateful. He's not in solitary confinement. He could have been in there for 6 to 8 months waiting for a court-martial.
But the attorneys have basically said we now have to sit and wait. And so forgive me, reads Stewart's statement, I don't trust.
I think we can draw a comparison between how your son's being treated and how the January 6th protesters have been treated, right?
Yes.
So essentially, anybody who speaks out against this administration or this government right now are being treated like political prisoners.
I've heard some of those from the January 6th imprisonment have not even been charged.
That's
we
correct.
Talked to a woman,
A reporter.
who said one person that is in prison was so badly beaten, he literally lost an eyeball.
I believe that.
Yeah, so right now in our government, if you speak out against it, you are imprisoned and not charged and held as, I think, a political prisoner.
Unequivocally. And you guys brought up a really good point earlier on, and it was that our Congress, they respond to one thing, and that's public pressure. And I think as long as we keep the fire burning beneath their feet, they're actually going to do something. And very few people in Congress have the courage to speak out against this administration and tell the truth. And one of those people is MTG and Madison Cawthorn, Ted Cruz, just to name a few. So, I mean, I would advocate that our listeners and our followers call their congresspeople and, demand justice for Lieutenant Colonel Scheller.
I mean, 17 years. And as the judge said, he's never had anyone in his court-martial room with as impeccable, not a spot on his record. He was in the upper 3 tiers on his way up. This is the man, he said, that in his mind, after he looked at all of the videos and read all of the text and he looked at all of the evidence, he said this is just a man who was frustrated and angry, and this could have been dealt with in a different way.
Right. So we like to close our shows out with the guest giving our followers a piece of advice or just leaving them with one last thing. What would you guys say to them if you had to say something?
Well, I've got a lot of advice to give listeners. Let's start with, as Americans, we have to get off the couch. We have to get engaged and involved. I didn't want to get engaged and involved with this, but it was our son, so we didn't have a choice in our minds. But now that I'm engaged and now that I'm involved and now that I've educated myself, I don't like what I see. And I probably can't retire now because I see a lot of things that I can engage in to make better for my children and my grandchildren.
Right.
So that's one thing. I'll turn it over to you, and you can.
Those mothers are as mad as hell. I mean, those mothers are finding their voices. They don't like what they're seeing, those mothers and those grandmothers. And I just thank God for them. And I thank God for all the prayers. And I am sure that God has shown up in a big way. This country has been praying. They have been opening their pocketbooks and supporting them. They have been writing their congressmen. They have been writing Secretary of the Navy, Carlos Del Toro, and saying, release him and sign that. They are just calling the office constantly. You can make a difference. When we started this, we were David and Goliath.
Right.
We really were. Our son was David and the military was Goliath, and the people are coming forth and we're hearing their voices, and now is not the time to stop. Just get louder. Let your thoughts be known.
So I have another bit of advice. We have a volunteer army, a voluntary military we have for the last 20 years. I've had many people come to me. I've been on talk shows, and people have said, I have an 18-year-old that's wanting to join the military, the Marine Corps. Oh my goodness, your story, what should I tell them? Well, first of all, we have been incredibly proud for 17 years of our son and his accomplishments. And I'm proud of the Marine Corps that they have helped mold him into the man that he is. But I will say to parents if my 18-year-old or if one of my grandchildren come to me, I'm going to educate them. I want them to understand Lieutenant Colonel Scheller's story. I want them to understand what courage is, to your point. I want them to understand that when you join the military, you are giving up rights that you may know as a civilian. The judicial system, rights of freedom of speech. I just want to make sure, young man, young woman, that you understand that and that you go into it eyes wide open. But I can't discourage anyone from having a child go into the military because I'm still hopeful. I'm an optimist. I hope that if this whole affair changes the military by 1 degree, it will hopefully make it better for the next generation that serve.
Yeah, very, very, very well said. I want to thank you guys again for raising such a courageous man. And I know that his story will definitely go down in history.
Thank you. Thank you,
I think so. I think it'll be taught in, maybe not in our public schools, but it will be taught in military schools and colleges on freedom of speech and chain of command and you name it. It will be a case study.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a saying here on the show, and it's find your courage, stand up, and speak out. So thank you both for doing that.
Thank you so much. We appreciate the time.